So in this lecture, let's discuss the listening question types. So what types of questions will you see on your listening section? There are different types of questions that you will see. First of all, let's discuss the types of questions according to what you need to do, right? How do you need to choose an answer? Some of the questions are multiple choice questions with just one answer. For example, like this one. What is the lecture mainly about? There are 4 answer choices and you need to just pick one. Sometimes you have other multiple choice questions when you have 2 and more answers. So for example, like here, according to the lecture, what are some reasons for not classifying the tomato as a fruit? And you have 5 answer choices here and you need to pick 3 of them. So this is a multiple choice with 2 and more answers, right? So this is a question with 3 answers that will work. So sometimes you will have such questions when you need to pick more than one answer. Okay, another question is like this. You have a chart and it's kind of a true-false question, right? So maybe it's familiar for you from some other exercises and tests. So you need to choose if every of this sentence is true or false sentence. Or sometimes if any of these options are answering the question which is written here, right? For example, here we have indicate whether each of the following is a step in the process. For example, all of them were in the listening passage, but just some of them were a step in the process, right? So sometimes they're all true, it's all true, it was all happening, but we need to be smarter, we need to go further, we need to indicate which ones were a step in the process, okay? So it goes like this, we put the ticks in different yes or no columns, and this is how we make our answer choice. So now let's talk about TOEFL listening question types in terms of what they're asking you to do, okay? So there are 3 types. The first one is main idea, the second is details question, and then inferences question. So there are just 3 types. It's a little less than in the reading section, right? Just 3 types of questions: main idea, details, and inferences. So the main idea question only happens once during your listening passage, right? So it happens several times during your listening section, but just once in every listening passage. So if you are having a lecture, then the first question will always be a main idea question, and it will be just one main idea question for this passage, for this lecture. And then you'll have a mixture of details and inferences questions. They will ask you different things, and then you move to the next dialogue or lecture, and again there will be one main idea question, and then the rest would be a mixture of details and inferences. So let's have a closer look. Here we have a typical example of the main idea question. What does the speaker mainly discuss? And we need to pick up the main topic of this passage, and it was said in the very first sentence of the listening. Or what is the lecture mainly about? Again, we need to choose what is the discussion mainly about. This is already a question for the dialogue that you just heard, the discussion or a dialogue, and we need to choose the answer of what they were talking about. What is the main topic of the lecture? Sometimes it can be said like this. Or why does the student go to see his professor, right? Why did the student come? So again, the main idea question. So now this is an example of a details question. According to the professor, blah, 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 right? What is a ragtime or blah, or anything else. According to the professor, and they're asking you about a specific detail from what you were listening. So you need to pay a lot of attention while you're listening to the passage. You need to write down as many notes as you can. And once you have a details question, you need to just look at your notes and see where is the answer. Where did you write this down? Okay. This is another example of a details question. You here need to choose 2 answers. What can be said about fish rubbings? And there are just 2 details which can be said about fish rubbings. You need to find them. And sometimes we have a details question which goes like this. This is a chart. And again, we have here like indicate whether each of the following is a step in the process, is a step in the pigeon training process. So here some of these options were in the listening passage, but weren't the steps in the process, okay? So let's have a closer look. Giving the young pigeon short practice flights. Getting the bird to respond to its owner call. Removing the tag when the bird enters the cote. Increasing the bird's stamina throughout extending the flight distance, releasing the bird with other birds from a central meeting place. So these are different options, and some of them were steps in the process of pigeon training, and some of them were just details about whatever else, right? They were all in the listening passage, but they weren't the step in the process of training. So let's have a look. Here are the answers. So we see that removing the tag when the bird enters the cote. So the bird is entering and we're taking some paper out of its little leg. This is not a step in the pigeon training, right? The bird didn't learn anything from that, right? You took some stuff from its leg. So the bird stayed as stupid or as smart as it was before. There was no training going on. And the same is about releasing the bird with other birds from a central meeting place. Again, the bird didn't learn anything. It was just released. It wasn't the step of the pigeon training. So the steps of the pigeon training were just giving the young pigeon short practice flights, getting the bird to respond to its owner call, and increasing the bird's stamina throughout extending the flight distance. So these were the steps in the process. Well, the way we did it right now was completely logical, right? We didn't even hear anything and we did it. But of course, it's much better to do it after you're listening to the passage, because they're explaining you everything, right? They explain you that after the training process is done or a flight is done, they remove the tag from the bird, and or like they release them all at the same time, and then they also dive into pigeon training process and then explain what is happening there. So after you hear all of that, you're more sure about your answers, right? But pay attention. Sometimes they're asking you about not just what was true and what was false, but a specific thing, like which was a step in the pigeon training process. So if they're asking you a specific thing, like pay attention to how the question looks like, right? It's very important for details questions. You need to pay attention to what they're saying, and then you'll be fine. Okay, sometimes it goes like this. We hear something about stars, prisms, and plates, and we have these different characteristics, and we need to match which characteristic goes where. So it goes like this: prisms A, plates B, stars C. All right? Now let's talk about the inferences. A very typical inference question is, why does the professor say this? And then you hear a little piece from the listening passage. So the little piece that you're going to hear in this question, and they repeat it again, right? So they take a quote from the listening and they repeat it again. This piece is usually that joke that the professor made, or that idiom, or that weird phrase that he said. Something was going on, right? You paid attention because you knew there will be a question about it, and this is how this question usually looks like. Why does the professor say this? And we have a quote with a joke or with a weird phrase, and then we need to find out why, what was the reason, what was the context, and why was the professor saying it. So they're checking if you can understand those informal things in the English language. Okay, what does the professor mean when he says this, right? So they are, again, having some quote from the listening passage, and they're asking you what was the meaning of that quote. What did the professor mean? So you need to figure out what was his reason to say that. Okay, what can be inferred about the two students? Here we have to make a conclusion. This is something that they did not say, right? They were just talking about something, and then we made a conclusion. We make an inference, like what were they talking about? So this is an inference question. So for example, they're talking about, oh, where's what? Like, I don't understand anything. Then we can conclude they're new students at the university, right? Or they agree that other students may not understand the system, right? If they were students, and then one student asked a question, and then the professor didn't pay attention, and another student asked a question, and then they kind of agreed, yeah, we all want to know about it. Then we can infer, yeah, they agree that other students may not understand it as well, right? So these are the things that we can infer. They were just talking, and then we looked at what they were talking about, and we made a conclusion about them. Oh, they're probably into this, or they're probably that. So this is an answer to this question. What can be inferred about two students? We are making a conclusion. Why does the speaker mention fires? So sometimes you're asked, why did, again, the speaker say something, or why did he mention something? Usually he, for example, gave an example, and we're asked like, okay, so what was the reason for that example? Did he want to illustrate something? Did he want to make a point or demonstrate something? What did he want to do with this example? So sometimes you're asked about that. Again, this wasn't something that was said. It was something that you have to guess, right? You have to, it is obvious, it is on the surface, it's very obvious, but it wasn't said out loud. You need to make that conclusion. What might the listeners do as a result of this lecture? This is an interesting one. So for example, they were talking about houses, and then the professor at the very end was encouraging them that, you know, older homes are really great, and there's such an advantage of buying them. So what might the listeners do as a result of this lecture? Probably buy older homes, right? Or no, the professor maybe was talking about how it's easy to build a new house nowadays, and blah, 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 and was talking all about it, about the building process, construction process, and then as a a result, maybe the students want to build themselves a new house. So this is like something that kind of obvious again, like what was the lecture mainly encouraging people to do, right? But you need to guess, okay, so what are the listeners going to do after they hear this lecture? Another example, when would this discussion most likely take place? Okay, and we have different options. When could this discussion take place? And again, nobody is telling you, oh, all right, so we are gathered here at the beginning of the semester to discuss, right? Nobody's going to say you that. Or like, okay, so it's a summer vacation coming and let's discuss. So there is nothing like that. They do not mention what time it is. But there's some hints you can make conclusions out of. So for example, the professor says, all right, so this is a list of literature that you will need. And then we can make a conclusion, okay, this is probably the beginning of the semester, right? Because at the very beginning of the semester, a professor gives a list of literature, and then the students need to buy these books because they will need them throughout the term. So this makes it obvious for us that at the beginning of the term is the right answer, that this is when this discussion most likely takes place. There are going to be hints that will help you out. You just need to be very careful about them. Write them down and pay attention to them. This was the inferences question. So again, we have 3 types of questions: main idea, details questions, and inferences questions. We're going to talk about each one of them. And so after we are finished with all these 3 types of questions, you're going to nail the listening section. Thanks for watching.